Thank you very much, Julia. So before we begin, first off, I'd like to give a big thanks to the University of Calgary for an excellent lunch and a beautiful place. Give us a clap if we could. Now I know Julia and Greg are people, and you know how I know this? I came to an academic conference and had people play the piano for me at lunch. Now this is going over the top. I know we haven't been together, but that's a new one for me. Okay, so today, this afternoon, we're going to try to link together some ideas about, what's happening on the landscape, what role does seismic play, and how are wildlife actually reacting to some of this disturbance that we have on the landscape, and what are some ways that we can better measure it. So my session today, and the thing that my lab and others within Scott's lab, and to be honest, across the entire team, is focused on how do we maintain wildlife habitat and how do we restore caribou habitat. We know we have a problem with caribou. We're maybe not as quite convinced or sure what some of the implications are for other species, but we are gaining enough information that we recognize there are going to have to be choices made for other species as well. So BERA is part of a much larger project when it works in my lab. So I run something called the Bioacoustic Unit, which is a partner with the Alberta Biodiversity Monitoring Institute. I also run something called the Boreal Avian Modeling Project. And what these are large scale programs that try to bring together all of the data and information that an individual student, an individual consultant, an individual government agency collects to learn about something. So you learn something about seismic, that's great. You learn something about well pads, that's great. But if we really want to understand what's going on, we have to understand all of these things, right? Seismic is just one part of the things that are changing. So we're focused on trying to put this information into a larger cumulative effects framework. And we do this through something called Wild Tracks, which if you have time, it's at the back and we can show it. But it's a tool that lets you actually upload your data, share it, whether that be human point counts for birds, autonomous recording units that Thurinder will talk about, remote cameras that Alexandra will talk about. But by bringing this data together, we can do things like this. So this is a map of Alberta that would suggest this is how many ovenbirds you would see in the province of Alberta if humans didn't exist. Now, when we take into account all of what we've learned over the past 20 to 30 years of human footprint, human relationships, the world looks like that. And it's pretty fundamentally different. Now, there are many, many things that lead to the quality of the habitat being very different for this species over time. Now, by bringing all this data together, we have an incredibly good understanding of how birds in particular respond to forest type, how they respond to forest age, whether fire differs from harvest. And we can also use this to quantify the magnitude of different industrial sectors in terms of their impact on birds. And so if we just simply look at the one on the left, it highlights the major sectors. We've got agriculture, forestry, energy, urban industrial, and transportation in terms of the local effect they would have on an ovenbird. And what you can see is energy is part of that equation, forestry is part of it, et cetera. And there's some pretty expected relationships. If you add those up across a particular landscape, like the oil sands region, right, and include parts of the southern part of the boreal, agriculture is the #1 driver of habitat loss for this species. But we can also do this for all of the various sectors. What we can also do is split the energy sector into its various constituent parts. We have seismic lines, pipelines, mine sites, industrial facilities, and we know quite well how ovenbirds react to those at a local scale for all of those disturbances. We add up the magnitude of those disturbances using tools like what Greg has that give us the remote sensing quantified estimates of those phenomena. We can quantify what actual industrial activities done by the energy sector have the greatest effect on the species. It is important to note, those are not big numbers from the energy sector perspective. They're but one part of the overall cumulative effects problem. But one of the things that you'll see when you look at these categories, and what I think you will have seen throughout today's presentations, is those are really broad categories, right? We need more detail if we really want to talk about the success of the energy sector at mitigating their impact. Seismic lines, they go from 2 meters to 10. Seismic lines, they go from dirt to tall trees, right? Pipelines go from 10 meters to 120, right? And all of those things are realities that if we really want to understand the true percentages in terms of the magnitude of effects, we have to get right. And that's a big part of what these guys are going to talk about today. Now, What are some of the key missing pieces relative to what we did with BERA 1? Well, the first thing is we focused on species by species by species by species. You can go to the ABMI biodiversity browser where we host all of this data and type in any species you want, and you can get those same results. But we're increasingly seeing that there are changes in biotic relationships, just like we're seeing with caribou, right? Caribou's complex. Moose, deer, they go up. Wolves go up. Caribou go down, right? So if you don't understand that complexity, you might be missing some stuff. So we're focusing now a little bit more on the interplay and the interactions between things like small mammals and the raptor predators. How do linear features, how do well pads affect that? That bird on the left is called a brown-headed cowbird. It's the laziest parent on the planet. It lays its nest in other birds' eggs, and it likes human disturbance. So is it playing a role in changing the other species that has something more than just the footprint relationship? So that's a big question, is what are these interactions? Are there more complex things that we need to understand? The other thing that's really important, I think, is we keep emphasizing that if seismic lines just recover, everything will be fine. That may or may not be true. But this graph up, or this figure of series is a series of seismic lines in typical aspen forest near Lac La Biche. The one on the left, lots of dirt, lots of human activity. The one on the right, you can't see that it's there. And guess what? Birds don't have a problem with the one on the right. They're completely happy. They live across it. It's recovered. We know that. But the one on the left, it isn't just habitat loss. Many species actually avoid being anywhere near it, not just the line itself. Yes, they don't like the line, but they also don't like the adjacent forest to it. And the question is, will veg fix that, or is there something else going on? And one thing that we're proposing to study in BERA is it quads and trucks and the actual activity of humans going down that linear feature that has a bigger effect than the vegetation itself? So one of the ways we're tackling that is to make maps of human activity levels. So this one is particularly emphasizing noise, but this is the oil sands region. What we have on the left is the probability of audible noise, and on the right is how loud it is. And what we're trying to do over the next couple of years in BERA is to refine this to understand better which seismic lines, which pipelines, which roads are getting used more and why, so that we can start to think about talking with users about which lines do you really need? Which ones would you be willing to give back and get off of? And, is there some kind of in-between thing? Because if we don't, doing all this work to reclaim these things, if somebody drives a quad over it or a snowmobile over it, it's wrecked and we're starting over again. So we have to start planning for that. Now, the other missing piece is we've done most of our work, and a best part of our understanding is in the uplands, but there's obviously way more forest types and very different species that live in them. The current evidence that we have is that birds that live in conifer show a much more negative response to seismic line than birds that live in aspen. So that's something we're trying to study. The last thing, and Thurinder will talk way more about this at his poster, is how we measure this edge effect matters. You can't do it coarsely. You have to do it with high resolution, and he'll talk a lot about how to do that. Now, Brendan, who's going to give a little bit of presentation though, I got a lot of bird data, people. I can tell you a lot about birds, but I cannot quantify sort of the benefits of planting seismic lines yet. I can't quantify the benefits of planting well pads because we don't have the remote sensing to do it, right? AVI, the standard products that are available just are not good enough. And so Brendan's poster, which you'll be able to look at, shows us how integration of traditional ways of measuring vegetation, like the Forest Resource Inventory or AVI, combined with LiDAR, combined with Landsat, combined with planet imagery, can do incredibly better at understanding why birds are doing what they're doing. At the same time, as part of Wild Tracks, we have a huge information system to help the remote sensors. So everywhere we go, you can see we've gone a lot of places, we have a picture set that's stored within Wild Tracks that shows you what did the conditions look like on the ground. And what we're trying to do, our part in the remote sensing thing is we're lazy. We hate counting plants, like we hate it. So what we want to do is, can I take a quick picture and figure out how well that could be used to help inform remote sensing efforts? Now, ultimately, what we do with this stuff is we then say, all right, if we're going to invest $10 million in restoring seismic lines, what are many of the pros and cons? What are going to be the benefits? Could that money be used somewhere else, planting well pads instead? And so a lot of what we do, and Lionel, who's here in the room, has done a lot of this work, is project out the future. Use these models to make projections about what would happen if we managed for caribou differently than what we do now. What would happen if we can restore seismic lines 10 times faster? And so then we can look at the outcomes for birds over time and start to talk about whether or not we've exceeded thresholds. And that's what a lot of this does. So ultimately, what the students you're going to see today are focused on the very BERA specific questions that link to this great amount of amazing work that's going to show us why seismic lines are doing what they're doing. But hopefully we can also use that data to scale up to think about these big scale trade-off questions where we start to do critical assessments of what is going to happen at a very large scale in space and time. So with that, I'll invite Thurindu to come up and he'll give you his quick spiel. Then we'll have Alessandro. And then unfortunately, Brendan couldn't be here, so we'll watch a video and then I'll turn it over to Greg.
Thanks, Erin. Hello, everyone. I'm Thurindu Krishan, a graduate student with Dr. Erin Bayne at the University of Alberta. Today, I'll be talking about my research project that aims to understand the response of boreal songbird communities to linear features of different widths and the edge effect. As we all know, boreal forest of Alberta is heavily dissected by different linear features like seismic lines, pipelines, transmission lines, and roads. However, provincial bird models and impact assessments often ignore their within group variations in making management and regulatory decisions. But these linear features are substantially different from one another based on their gap width, vegetation recovery, and the surrounding habitat type. So using ARU-based acoustic data and vegetation data we've collected in the field, we are trying to address two key research questions. The first one, how wide a linear feature have to be to change boreal songbird communities, and does vegetation recovery influence this process? And the second question, do all linear features create edge effect in the remaining forest? Talking about the importance of this study, we are trying to determine threshold linear feature width that are wide enough to change boreal songbird communities in these mature forests. Also, we are trying to determine what linear features create edge effect and what remain unchanged. Because most of the time, edge effect is detrimental for most of the bird communities. Then this knowledge will help us, researchers, government bodies, private sector institutions, to determine what linear features should be actively restored and what should be left for natural regeneration. Thank you.
All right. So hi, everyone. I am Alessandro Franceschini from the Bayne Lab. And as part of the human and wildlife team, my project will look into small mammal feedback on linear features and well site recovery. So small mammals, such as hares and small rodents, have a crucial role on ecosystem functioning, affecting a wide range of processes, which include forest succession, seedling recruitment, and predator species assemblage. However, the disturbance from linear features and wild pets can significantly alter the local composition of small mammals by favoring the colonization of generalist and open habitat species, which can have consequences on linear features and wild pets regeneration, as well as on the boreal food web structure. However, a detailed understanding of all the factors that are involved in this process, as well as the consequences on the recovery trajectory of the seismic lines, are still not really well understood. And so the aim of my project is to fill these knowledge gaps and get a better understanding of what are the responses of small mammals to linear features and wild pets disturbance, as well as how are these responses affecting the site recovery. So to efficiently answer these questions, camera trapping represents a cost-efficient tool that, compared to many other methods that are commonly used for small mammal research, like for example, live trapping, would allow us to conduct surveys over a broad scale and also with minimal effort. However, its application for small mammal research is a relatively new field, and there is no clear indication on how to do it. So for us, our first step was to develop a new method that would allow us to monitor small mammals using camera traps. And to do this, over the last field season, we tested 2 different setups, as you can see here. And overall, we had a pretty success. We collected more than 100,000 pictures from 120 sites that were distributed in an area between Fort McMurray and Conklin. And well, if you want to know more about this novel method and how it's going to impact future research on linear features and wellpet, I recommend you to come and visit me. Thank you. So now it's the turn of Brendan, who is not here. So I'm just gonna play the video, which I guess I can do like this. All right.
Hello, my name is Brendan Casey, and I'm wrapping up my PhD in Erin Bayne's lab at the University of Alberta. My work can be broken up into 2 broad themes. 1, to use and evaluate common sources of spectrum. Casey, and I'm wrapping up my PhD in Erin Bayne's lab at the University of Alberta. My work can be broken up into 2 broad themes. 1, to use and evaluate. Hello.
Oh, Brendan, try again.
Hello, my name is Brendan Casey, and I'm wrapping up my PhD in Erin Bayne's lab at the University of Alberta.
How many people can push buttons and make it do weird things, right?
Hello, my name is Brendan Casey, and I'm wrapping up my PhD in Erin Bayne's lab at the University of Alberta. My work can be broken up into 2 broad themes. 1, to use and evaluate common sources of spatial covariates for modeling bird habitat relationships, and this includes classified land cover data, LiDAR, and spectral indices from satellites. And 2, use these tools to explore how birds respond to forestry in the boreal. One project I recently wrapped up examined if remote sensing can be used to better predict how birds respond to forestry. The increasing availability and accessibility of wall-to-wall remote sensing data provide opportunities to move beyond the classified habitat layers we usually rely on to model birds. But the expansion of potential covariates comes with uncertainty. Which ones best predict how birds respond to harvesting? To answer this, we compared the predictive power of 3 sources of variables characterizing harvests on 20 bird species. We used predictor variables from forest inventories, airborne LiDAR, and a time series of Landsat normalized burn ratio. And we found that LiDAR metrics and spectral measures of harvest severity are more predictive of birds than the discrete harvest severity and habitat classes often used in predictive models. Notably, across the 20 bird species we looked at, measures of harvest severity using the normalized burn ratio was the strongest overall predictor of bird response. Why is this important? Well, for those of us studying wildlife, it expands our options past classified habitat data that is often temporally limited and requires specialized skills to produce, towards higher resolution data that better matches our wildlife surveys in time and can be quickly analyzed using cloud computing platforms like Google Earth Engine, all while avoiding the costs of boots on the ground vegetation surveys. Thanks for your time.
Come on up, team. My first observation is Aaron and his group are also remote sensors. They just use camera traps and ARUs and sometimes even satellites. Okay. So this is now theme 4, remote sensing. So I'm here basically to provide a little bit of context, introduce the team, and then just turn it over to the actual researchers who will be telling you about their studies. So this is the remote sensing team: Irina Taranteva, Zuyan Chen, Colette Shelley, and Nicole Byford, Tanya Yeomans, Marlis Hegels, Nicholas Heiss, and Jasper Koch. Marlis, Nicholas, and Jasper are not with us. They're actually German students from Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich. So they're going to be, we're going to try the video thing again. The rest of us are here. Okay, so what do we do in the remote sensing team? Essentially, what we try and do is develop workflows and planning tools that assist management and research activities. So some of the things we do are directly related to things like restoration planning and restoration assessment. Other things are just trying to get spatial information that's going to help our research collaborators, research partners to do what they do, but over larger areas. So where possible, we prefer to measure things directly. So some remote sensing technologies allow you to measure the attribute of interest directly. So a LiDAR, for example, it's a 3D remote sensing technology. You can measure the height and width and depths of things directly. So that's our preference when we can do it. I think you saw examples from the previous session where you can measure noise directly or take pictures directly. So when possible, that's what we always like to do. In other cases, though, we can't. We just don't have the technology, or the subject is not able to be revealed directly. So what we do is we develop indices that we hope are related to the feature of interest. So we do both types of research in my group. And in the cases where we're looking at something we can measure directly, the question in general is almost always, under what set of conditions can we do this? What set of environmental conditions, what set of technical conditions? For example, people often ask me, can you do the establishment survey remotely? Of course we can. If you can see it, we can do it with remote sensing. But the question is, can we do it at the scale you need? Can we do it this time of year or that time of year? So those are the styles of questions we ask when the question is, there's something we can measure directly. If the question is, we can't see it directly, but we want to develop an indice, then the style of question is usually, to what extent is the thing that we can measure related to the thing that we want information about? So we have a diagram. It doesn't have quite as many arrows on it as some of the rest, but I'm going to fill in some of these arrows. So on the left side, we've got a line that we're going to assess for restoration. On the right side, I'm going to build a line that's already been treated, and we want to monitor the success of that treatment. So let's deal with the stuff on the left first. So this is now restoration assessment. Some of our targets are attributes of the line. Some of our targets are attributes of the matrix beside the line. And some of our targets I would characterize as edge effect, either immediately adjacent to the line or extending into the surrounding forest. So one of the things that we're interested in doing, and I've already talked about this very briefly in the morning, is just the physical dimensions of the feature itself. So what we've found is that using LiDAR through tools like the forest line mapper, we can map the center line and the extent of linear disturbances very accurately. We can attribute with all sorts of things related to the surrounding forest or the understory structure. Some of you in the room might remember Sylvia Lasada, for example, who worked on this in the past, and other researchers. So that's one of the things that we do. Another thing that we do is we want to look at the recovery status of what's happening on that line. Now, I hear it again and again and again. We've got to do this over vast areas. I know. So one of the things we're trying to assess, and you're going to hear Tanya talking about it in a little bit, is what about satellite technology? What can we get from satellite technology? Now, I'm pretty sure that we're not going to be able to measure things directly with stuff that's orbiting hundreds of kilometers above the surface of the Earth. But are there indices that we can develop that are related to some sort of restoration information that we want to know about on the ground? So like I said, this is what Tanya will be speaking to you about. Using more higher spatial resolution data, we still want to ask the same questions. What can we do with better resolution data or different types of data like LiDARs and optical sensors? Can we still maybe do a better job of measuring recovery status on the line? And this is what Nicole will be speaking to you about. Next, I would say there's a series of things that we want to know about. Why are things behaving the way they are on the line? So for example, are there site limiting conditions that influence what's happening on the line either now or into the future? So for example, solar irradiance, the amount of light that exists on the linear feature certainly will have an influence on what's there and what could be done in the future in terms of restoration planning. So Marlis will be speaking to you about that. Another related feature I would say is, what about the status of the line in terms of its microtopography or its wetness? Is that something that we can measure with remote sensing and then characterize over large areas? And this is what Jasper will be speaking to you about. What about human use? I mean, we just heard Erin say that sometimes it's not the structure of the vegetation on the line, but rather, you know, our people driving back and forth on quads. So we have a project where we're trying to measure or map tracks and trails on lines. Unfortunately, that student is on leave, so we're not going to get to hear from him today. Edge effects. We're not doing tremendous amount of work on edge effects right now, but we are assessing some cool new technology from radar interferometry to see how far do the effects of the linear feature extend into the surrounding forest, and in particular on peatlands, where if you've driven 881, you'll notice on the one side of the road, it's wet. On the other side of the road, it's completely dry. So maybe we can measure that deformation in the peatlands directly with remote sensing, and this is what Nicholas will be talking to you about. Finally, and this one doesn't fit super cleanly on the diagram, we want to develop new ways of assessing the line. So you heard this morning already about plant functional traits, and a functional trait is just any trait of an organism that influence a function. In this case, the organism is a plant. And so what we want to do is, can we develop remote sensing traits that also maybe don't directly, you know, correspond with the way we think about plants, but they still tell us about the function of what's going on the ground. And this is what Suyan will be talking to you about. So that's the assessment side. If we now decide we're going to treat this line, again, we've always got a choice. We can treat it actively or we can leave it for natural. Let's take this scenario where we've decided to treat this line. So now we're going to plant some trees in here, and the provincial restoration criteria currently calls for 2 assessments: the survival assessment 2 to 5 years after planting, and an establishment survey 8 to 10 years after planting. So the things that are targets for these surveys are things like first detecting. We need to find the seedlings so that we could, for example, measure their height, count their density, see how their spatial coverage is across the line. So the question is, can we do these things with remote sensing? The answer is yes. But under what conditions can it be done reliably? And how can we scale it, is what it comes down to. So Irina Terencheva, Colette Shellyan will be talking to you about that. Okay, so this is our process diagram. Oh, plus we have one bonus talk that doesn't really fit cleanly onto the diagram, but I'm going to leave it as a surprise. Okay, so I will now invite Tanya to come through.
Thank you, and good afternoon, folks. My name is Tanya Yeomans, and I'm a Master's of Science student at the University of Calgary, co-supervised by both Dr. Greg McDermid and Dr. Gwendolyn Blue. And my research is focused on monitoring disturbance recovery using satellite time series data. And I'd like to walk through where my work sits within the greater BERA framework with this image. So the research that I'm doing is focused on restoration assessment, which is seen on the left-hand side of this diagram. My study is using satellite data to assess functional recovery status with respect to blocking movement for humans and wolves. And I'm looking at both seismic lines and well pads. And I'm focused on building models that can tell you if the location that you're interested in needs management intervention or not. So my research uses spectral recovery as a proxy for functional recovery metrics of canopy height and canopy cover. So spectral recovery describes how a pixel changes through time while modeling the successive physical environments leading towards functional recovery. So with my analysis, I'll be classifying disturbance features as functionally recovered, recovering, and not recovering. And I'll be doing this through two projects. The first project is an interannual time series approach, which will use annual imagery to determine which areas are showing change year over year and which areas show little change and might be struggling to recover. The second project is an intra-annual approach, which relies on differences between vegetation communities and composition and the timing of the resulting spectral signatures to identify and label functional recovery status. I'll be comparing my models to vegetation height and percent cover measurements that we took in the field, as well as from LiDAR data. And the goal of my research is to provide a methodology to assess disturbance recovery over large areas. So this will help stakeholders effectively direct resources to areas where they're most needed by providing that preliminary remote assessment before you send staff to the field for more detailed work. I'm hoping that this will lead to improved management practices and promote a more effective return to recovery. And I'm eager to chat with folks around the topics of functional recovery, scales of analysis, and restoration assessment, either at my poster or throughout the workshop, or email me. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nicole Byford, and I'm in my first year of my master's program in Greg McDermid's lab. My project is on mapping vegetation cover and species composition on seismic lines with aerial remote sensing. So as part of BERA's remote sensing team, my research focuses restoration assessment, and more specifically on the recovery status of seismic lines. While Tanya's project looked at recovery status from a functional perspective using satellite imagery, I'm looking at recovery status from a restoration framework perspective using high-resolution aerial imagery. The Provincial Restoration and Establishment Framework uses the term advanced regeneration to describe seismic lines that are successfully regenerating naturally. These lines have greater than 70% coverage of acceptable vegetation species. Lines that do not have advanced regeneration may be in a state of early or arrested succession and are potential candidates for active intervention. We need information on vegetation cover and species composition to differentiate between early or arrested succession lines and lines that have reached advanced regeneration. To achieve this, my project will explore methods based on aerial remote sensing and deep learning. Light detection and ranging and multispectral data obtained from drones and aircrafts have been used with deep learning algorithms such as convolutional neural networks, or CNNs, to map vegetation cover and species composition in mature forests. However, this has not yet been attempted for disturbance features such as seismic lines that have various stages of vegetation recovery. My project will investigate how environmental factors such as plant size and technical factors such as pixel size influence our ability to accurately map vegetation cover and species composition on seismic lines with remote sensing and CNNs. So thank you for listening, and if you're interested in learning more about my project, please come visit me during the poster session.
Okay, hi everyone. So my name is Colette. You heard from me before, but now I'm going to be telling you about my second part of my master's research, which I completed in September. And this project investigates seedling growth on actively restored seismic lines. So monitoring recovery over time is a key component to seismic line restoration. To understand how well a forest is recovering after restoration treatments like mounding and tree planting are applied, we need information about tree height, tree density, and their coverage across the seismic line. These variables allow us to evaluate whether trees are on a trajectory towards recovery or if intervention may be needed. Typically, this information is obtained through establishment surveys that are carried out by field crews. But these field-based establishment surveys take a long time, and they're difficult to scale across the vast network of seismic lines that we have here in Alberta. Therefore, myself and other members of the remote sensing team are exploring ways to use drones to do establishment surveys on seismic lines. So digital aerial photogrammetry is a remote sensing technique that uses overlapping airborne photographs to create 3D point clouds, as you can see in these photos. And previous research has already demonstrated that digital aerial photogrammetry can be used to measure the height of individual trees on seismic lines. But there are some uncertainties with this approach. The passive sensor that we use for digital aerial photogrammetry does not penetrate vegetation like with LiDAR. So therefore, it's hypothesized that there are some environmental factors that would be influential in the accuracy of these remote height predictions. Specifically in my project, I was interested in looking at how leaf phenology, or the time of year which we take the pictures, influence height predictions. I also want to understand how nearby vegetation, species differences, and the size of seedlings themselves influence remote height predictions with photogrammetry. So I don't have time to dive into my results right now, but if you're interested in learning more, I invite you to join me at my poster. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Irina Terenteva, and I'm a postdoctoral researcher in the remote sensing team. I aim at developing best practices for seedling detection using deep learning. A synergy between drone imagery and artificial intelligence provides an opportunity for accurate and automatic detection of regenerating seedlings, a key element of restoration monitoring. It's less laborious than field studies and only looks scary. Actually, no one coded from scratch. We all use packages. Don't get me wrong. Humans are still superior in visual interpretation. I can detect that seedlings, and all these little heavy guys. But AI can't do that so reliably. But it can do that faster than me. And unlike me, it can work during the night and be retrained using larger, more diverse data sets that we're collecting in BERA. Oh, it's done. So it's 90% accuracy for seedlings more than 60 centimeters. Not bad, but actually it's just a simple spring imagery with quite homogeneous vegetation. How algorithm will perform if we will have summer imagery with lots of bushes, shadows, mounds, hidden caribous? These are questions we're trying to answer. AI models, ideally, could provide us with end-to-end learning approaches with no need in complicated pre-processing steps and all this feature engineering. Just fly a drone, get your data. And it could also make additional calls on species, health status, ground vegetation, adjacent forest, land footprint itself. Integrated into BERA tools, it could facilitate developing workflows for operational assessment of restoration success within seismic lines and other industrial disturbances. Thank you so much, and see you near my poster.
So thank you, Irina, for a great presentation. Hi, everyone. My name is Suyan, and I'm a first-year master's student supervised by Dr. Greg McDermid and Dr. Anna Dabros at the University of Calgary. Today, I'll be sharing with you how I plan to use pixels and point clouds to map plant traits on seismic lines. As a member of BERA's remote sensing team, I focus on the strategic priority of restoration assessment. And in particular, I'm interested in the functional recovery status of seismic lines from a plant and carbon perspective. So peatlands are important carbon sinks where plants play a direct role in controlling carbon cycling through processes like photosynthesis. Plant functional traits are the morphological and physiological features that affect plant functions that allow them to survive, grow, and reproduce. But the creation of seismic lines can lead to changes in the composition of plant communities and its associated functional traits, which can ultimately shift the total productivity of a region. There's a need for efficient and non-destructive methods to monitor changes in plant communities and productivity. Like many of my colleagues, I hope to harness the power of drones to meet these assessment criteria. So how can we link plant functional traits to remotely sensed datasets? I spent this field season conducting drone-mounted LiDAR and multispectral surveys in a treed fen to tackle this question. Over the next few months, I aim to create maps of plant traits to develop a remotely sensed indicator which can inform us on the productivity status on seismic lines. Ultimately, this indicator could act as a measurement of functional recovery. If you're interested in discussing how drones can be used for environmental assessment, please come chat with me during the poster session. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. My name is Marlies, and I'm a German master student from the LMU in Munich. And I got the chance through the MyTech School Link program to spend the last summer as a visiting research student in Calgary, where I joined the BERA remote sensing team. So as I've been up north in the boreal forest of Alberta, I took this picture of a seismic line. And here you can see the sunlight coming in, some shadow on the ground, but most importantly, no regrowth on the line. And of course, there could be multiple environmental factors influencing that, but I specifically assessed the question, where do trees have enough light to grow? And to answer that, I am characterizing the light conditions on seismic lines. But why 4? Within the planning of the restoration assessment, it's already beneficial to know site-limiting factors constraining tree growth, which means on one hand, we could be more efficient by applying treatment to lines with enough light only. And on the other hand, if we were able to detect unsuitable tree sites, we could develop new strategies to increase light availability on those lines. So what I've been doing this summer was deploying many light sensors on a variety of seismic lines so that I am able to analyze factors controlling the light conditions on the line, which gives me the chance to evaluate, for example, the orientation and line width regarding the sunlight. And as the affected area of seismic lines, which may require active intervention, is quite large, I want to go one step further and try to link drone-based LiDAR data, point clouds, which represent the canopy structure quite well, to the light conditions on the line to enable the detection of unsuitable tree sites within a larger area. So if you're interested in how I will conduct that, come and see my poster. And apparently I can't attend today in person, so feel free to ask my supervisors or write me an email. Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Marlies, and I'm
Quickly on myself, I am Jasper Koch, and I am currently completing my Master's in Environmental Modeling at Maximilian University. Through scholarship of MyTech, I was able to join the Applied Geospatial Research Lab and work on my project using LiDAR to quantify microtopography on seismic lines. So why is measuring microtopography relevant? Seedlings require a very specific moisture environment in order to thrive. And hummocks and peatlands offer this moisture environment by protecting the seedlings from the shallow groundwater table. And seismic lines often have depressed microtopography, which contributes to them being stuck in the state of arrested succession. One way of counteracting this is to create artificial microtopography, so-called mounds, on seismic lines. The problem with this process is that it's quite expensive and creates a lot of new disturbance. So the goal of my project is to develop a tool that identifies the level of microtopography on these seismic lines, so we can focus the application of mounting to lines with depressed microtopography. This is very much relevant for the growth and survival aspect of the promoting return to forest cover. And it is very relevant for the microtopography and water table aspect of the restoring natural carbon dynamics goal of BERA. If you are curious to learn more about my project, please have a look at my poster and ask questions to Dr. Scott Ketches. Thank you for your attention.
Hi there, BERA team. I'm Nicholas. I'm a visiting research student through MyTex, and I'm from the LMU in Munich. I work in the remote sensing team, and my project is radar interferometry as a technique for mapping peatland surface deformation around energy development infrastructure. As you already can see on the picture on the right, I'm using spaceborne satellite data. But why for? I wanted to have a look at this picture of the mineral field road. You can see the effects of it blocking the horizontal water flow. That's why we have the water standing on the left and way drier conditions on the right. But a lot of questions arise here, which I like to address. To which extent is the surrounding area influenced? How does it influence the carbon dynamics? Are there differences between various wetland types which the road is crossing? How does this effect change through time since the road was built? How well can we map it from space? Which remote sensing techniques work properly? And now we also only can map the anomaly as the road is already there, but how was pattern before of this swamp-like behaving peatland? That's all the questions I like to address in my project. And to situate my project within BERA, I'm, as I said, in the remote sensing team using satellite data and looking at those edge effects of this infrastructure, and also try to make the connection between surface topography and the water table. And the water table also strongly connects to the natural carbon dynamics as it influences the soil carbon stock and the soil carbon emissions. So thank you for your interest, and if you want to know more about the radar methods and the specifics of this project, please come and see my poster and ask questions to my supervisors who will attend there. And otherwise, just email me. I'm always happy to inform you about this project.
Okay, hi everyone again. Very excitingly, I get to be the surprise extra talk. So yeah, today I'd like to introduce to everyone a new study within the BERA project. And this new study is a case study on the effects of 4D seismic activity on a boreal fen. And this project is a collaboration between myself and Lilia Weiland from the Soils and Eco-Hydrology team. When we think of seismic line recovery, we often think of a scenario where vegetation is cleared and then the resulting line is now on a one-way road to its pre-disturbance state. But what if we consider a scenario where seismic surveys are repeated time and time again? 4D seismic activity describes this exact scenario of recurrent surveys that typically reuse existing lines. Now, let's say a lot of time has passed between two consecutive surveys. In this case, there might be a lot of vegetation regrowth that needs to be cleared again before the next survey can occur. And the resulting redisturbed corridor can be called a 4D seismic line. It's not yet well understood how the soft, hummocky terrain that exists in boreal peatlands is sensitive to recurrent visits from vegetation clearing machinery. So in this study, we aim to investigate if 4D seismic activity leads to accumulated impacts to soil compaction, groundwater, and microtopography. This spring, the BERA team identified a fen that comprises 3 seismic line classes. And these are lines with a one-time disturbance, a new disturbance, and a redisturbance, which could be considered 4D. This fen will allow us to carry out an opportunistic case study to see how peatland health is affected by 4D seismic activity. If we find that 4D seismic activity results in accumulated impacts, then the return of 4D seismic lines to their pre-disturbance state might follow a unique regeneration trajectory or require different restoration treatments. Thanks for listening. Both Lilia and I would love to chat more about this new project during the poster session. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to turn things back to Julia.
What? Okay. Thank you very much, remote sensing team and wildlife team. So this concludes our quick last year through all these amazing projects, but poster session is waiting for you. So we're going to do the same way. We're going to spend now, again, we're a tiny bit behind the program. So I think we have to catch up. We do need to kind of try and stick with our return time at 3:05 for the panel. So we have about 45, 50 minutes now to mingle with these researchers out in the poster session. And we would like to ask you the same questions again. Keep in mind those 3 questions. What connections did you discover? What you just heard, what you're going to be seeing out there, what stands out to you as an advancement, and what gaps do you see? So the same process that we've done earlier, and just feel free to use again those sticky notes, put them out there or leave them on your table wherever you wish. And now I would like you to, go out there and enjoy these wonderful posters. Thank you.